Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today is this. Before the inbound surge owns the dock, steer around the capacity trap. I want to begin with a simple warehouse lie that does not look like a lie when the day is moving. The dock schedule still has room, so the operation believes the building still has room. The appointments are booked, the carriers are lined up, the inbound freight is moving toward the facility. The business feels protected because product is coming in early, and on a screen, that looks like progress. But an open dock slot is not the same as open warehouse capacity, and a receiving plan is not the same as a controlled flow plan. That difference is where the trap starts. A dock slot tells you a trailer can arrive, but it does not tell you where the freight will live after it crosses the dock. It does not tell you whether put-away can keep up, whether reserve locations are clean, whether staging lanes are still available for outbound movement, or whether customer-critical freight can still move without fighting the inbound overflow. The schedule may look organized while the building is already absorbing more pressure than the plan can carry. This briefing is about that moment before the failure becomes obvious. The yard is not locked yet. The dock is not completely buried yet. Outbound has not fully lost control. Customer service is not yet explaining why stores missed replenishment. The operation still has motion, and that motion makes the original route feel defensible. But underneath that motion, the warehouse may be walking toward a capacity trap it can already see forming. That is why strategic evasion matters here. Strategic evasion is not avoiding freight, avoiding accountability, or finding a softer way to say no. It is the leadership discipline of seeing a predictable trap before it becomes active and changing the route before the trap owns the operation. The route changes. The objective does not. The objective is still customer supply, store replenishment, inventory availability, dock control, outbound movement, carrier coordination, and service reliability. The problem is that leaders often confuse loyalty to the route with loyalty to the objective. They keep the receiving plan because the receiving plan was approved. They keep the appointments because transportation already secured them. They keep unloading because product was pulled forward for a real business reason. They keep pressing the building because nothing has technically failed yet. That can look committed, but it may only be commitment to a path that has already become dangerous. I have made versions of that mistake before, not always in a warehouse, but in operations. You see a plan that was reasonable when it was built, and you keep pushing it because changing it early feels like creating friction. Then the work teaches you the harder lesson. A plan can be right when it is written and wrong when the road ahead changes. The leader's job is not to defend the old route. The leader's job is to protect the objective. In logistics, that lesson becomes physical fast. Freight takes space. Space affects movement. Movement affects visibility. Visibility affects picking. Picking affects outbound. Outbound affects the customer promise. When the freight arrives faster than the warehouse can convert it into controlled inventory, the operation has not removed risk. It has moved the risk indoors. There is also a timing issue hiding inside the surge. Early freight changes more than inventory position. It changes the sequence of the building. A trailer that arrives early does not just occupy a dock door. It competes with labor, with staging, with yard space, with put-away attention, with inventory control time, and with outbound priority. The building may be able to touch the freight, but touching freight is not the same as converting it into usable movement. That is where the mistake gets expensive. A leader may look at receiving performance and see productivity, while another part of the building is losing control. The dock team can be unloading. The receipts can be posting. The inbound board can look active, but outbound may be losing lanes, inventory control may be chasing location confidence, and transportation may be inheriting dwell time the receiving scorecard does not show. If the leader only reads the entry point, the building can appear successful while the system is getting weaker. A good strategic evasion read looks past the first visible success. It asks what the early freight will create after the first handoff. It asks whether the building can keep the freight moving through the full sequence, not just through the door. It asks whether the route still protects the customer promise after the freight arrives, not only whether the trailer can be received. That is a sharper read, and it is why this tool belongs in this logistics problem. Let's put this inside a real operating picture. Janelle is the warehouse operations manager at a regional retail replenishment distribution center. The building supports stores across 3 states. It handles import containers, domestic trailers, reserve storage, pick waves, outbound staging, time-sensitive launches, and customer-critical replenishment. This is not a broken building. The team knows the work. The systems function. The dock is busy, the yard is tight, and the day has pressure, but the operation is still alive. The freight picture changes when several inbound loads arrive earlier than the original plan. Some product was pulled forward to protect inventory availability. Some of it was pulled forward because cost exposure and timing uncertainty made the business want product closer to demand. Some of it supports peak planning. From the business side, that move is not irrational. If product is expected to be needed later, getting it closer now can feel like smart protection. At first, the plan looks workable. Transportation has appointments. The dock schedule is heavy, but not impossible. The yard is crowded, but still moving. Put-away is behind, but not collapsed. Labor is tight, but people are showing up and working. Outbound is still shipping. Customer-critical replenishment is under pressure, but it has not failed. That is exactly the kind of situation that traps leaders, because the evidence is mixed enough to defend the original plan. Different teams bring different truths into the room. The inbound supervisor says the team can keep receiving with a little more labor. Transportation says the carriers are already scheduled and delaying them may create cost. Replenishment planning says the product is needed to protect stores. Finance says the freight was pulled forward for a reason. Customer operations says shortages later will create their own pressure. The dock lead says clean staging space is disappearing. Inventory control says temporary locations are already weakening visibility. Outbound says customer critical loads are starting to fight for space. None of those people are wrong. That is the problem. A hard logistics decision often starts with several true statements that do not produce one controlled picture. Janelle has to decide whether the building can keep receiving on the current route or whether the route itself is now creating exposure. The first instinct is to keep going because stopping or slowing inbound feels like the more disruptive move. But the better question is not, can we keep receiving? The better question is, if we keep receiving this way, what will the freight do to the rest of the operation? Per sorts, that question changes the read because it moves the leader from the entry point to the consequence field. The dock is the entry point. The warehouse is the consequence field. The freight does not stop creating pressure once it is unloaded. That is when the warehouse has to locate it, label it, store it, keep it visible, keep it accessible, preserve pick flow, protect outbound staging, and make sure the inventory can actually support the customer promise. If the building cannot do those things cleanly, then receiving more freight may create a false sense of progress. The operation may show receipts while inventory control loses confidence. It may show trailers unloaded while outbound loses space. It may show product in the building while stores still miss replenishment because the product is not usable in time. That is why the line matters. Receiving the freight is not the same as controlling the flow. Janelle starts to see the deeper failure point. The visible issue is inbound volume. The missed driver is absorption capacity, not dock activity, absorption capacity. Can the warehouse receive the freight, move it to a clean location, preserve inventory visibility, protect outbound lanes, keep the yard readable, and still support customer critical movement? If the answer is no, the dock schedule is lying by omission. It tells her what can arrive. It does not tell her what the building can digest. The signs are already there. Put-away is clearing slower, then receiving is adding freight. Temporary locations are increasing without a clean control point. Staging lanes are holding inbound freight longer than intended. Customer critical outbound freight is losing clean space. Yard dwell is creeping up. Inventory control is spending more time reconciling movement that should have stayed clean. The dock is still working, but the building is starting to pay interest on a decision made upstream. That is the trap. The inbound surge will consume dock, yard, staging, put-away, and outbound capacity before the warehouse can convert the freight into usable inventory. It is specific. It is visible. It is consequential. It is still avoidable. That is why this is strategic evasion, not panic and not delay for the sake of delay. Strategic evasion asks the leader to steer before the trap activates. If the yard were already locked, Janelle might need a different move. If customer critical loads were already missing, she might need immediate stabilization. If an obstacle had already blocked the path, she might need redirection. But right now, she still has options. That is the value of acting while the forward read is still ahead of the failure. The uncomfortable part is that strategic evasion often asks a leader to act before everyone else agrees the problem is real. The warehouse may feel the trap before the business sees it. The dock lead may see space collapsing before the dashboard shows a clean failure. Inventory control may feel visibility weakening before reports are obviously wrong. Outbound may feel staging pressure before shipments officially miss. That gap is where leaders need discipline. Janelle cannot rely on a vague feeling that the building is tight. She needs a stronger read. The receiving rate is higher than the put-away rate. Temporary locations are multiplying. Outbound staging lanes are losing protection. Yard dwell is increasing. Customer critical freight is beginning to compete with early inbound product. Those are not complaints. Those are signals. Once she names them, she can name the trap and defend a route change without sounding like she is simply resisting volume. Changing the route does not mean stopping every inbound load. That is too blunt, and blunt moves usually show up after the leader waited too long. Strategic evasion is cleaner than that. Janelle separates freight by operating consequence, customer critical product, peak sensitive replenishment, low velocity inventory, freight that must move to reserve quickly, freight that can wait, freight that can go to overflow, freight that should not enter the building until a cleaner path exists. Then she looks at the route itself. Some appointments may need to be resequenced. Some doors may need protection for outbound or customer critical movement. Some trailers may need to remain staged in the yard rather than being unloaded into congestion. Some product may need overflow or alternate storage. Some put-away lanes may need priority. Some temporary locations may need limits before they damage visibility. The move is not to avoid freight. The move is to avoid the trap created by the wrong sequence. Janelle also has to manage the human side of the route change. Warehouse teams can hear a change in receiving sequence as criticism of their capacity. Transportation can hear it as a disruption to the appointment plan. Planning can hear it as a threat to inventory availability. Customer operations can hear it as risk to stores. If the leader does not name the objective, each team fills in the reason from its own pressure point. That is why the language of the route change matters. Janelle has to say, we are not slowing freight because the building does not want the work. We are protecting the path that turns the freight into service. We are protecting outbound space, inventory visibility, and customer critical movement. We are resequencing because unloading faster than we can absorb only creates a different failure later. That kind of language does not remove disagreement. It gives the disagreement a better center. Now, the argument is not about whether the warehouse is being difficult. The argument is about which route best protects the objective. That is where leaders need the conversation to land. This is also where leadership tone matters. If Janelle treats the route change like a panic move, the building will react like it is in panic. If she treats it like a control move, the building can stay disciplined. The message is not, we cannot handle the surge. The message is, we are going to handle the surge in a sequence the warehouse can actually convert into service. That is a stronger posture, and it keeps the conversation tied to execution instead of emotion. That distinction has to be communicated clearly. Transportation cannot just hear that the warehouse is slowing inbound. Replenishment planning cannot just hear that operations is pushing back. Finance cannot just hear that the cost protection strategy is getting complicated. Customer operations cannot just hear that product is waiting. The leader has to say what objective is being protected: customer critical movement, inventory visibility, outbound flow, dock control, yard readability, and the path that turns freight into service. If Janelle does not make that route adjustment, the consequence chain is predictable. First, congestion builds. The dock keeps receiving freight the building cannot absorb cleanly, so staging begins to hold product that should be moving. People start solving space problems by placing freight wherever it can fit. That may help the next hour, but it weakens the next day. Second, storage distortion shows up. Temporary locations become more common. Reserve space tightens. Product lands in locations that require extra explanation, extra tracking, or extra memory from people who already have too much moving. Once a building starts relying on tribal knowledge to compensate for weak location control, decision quality begins to drop. Third, inventory visibility weakens. The product may be physically in the building, but the system, location, and flow no longer tell a clean story. That creates one of the most frustrating logistics failures. Product arrived early, but the operation still cannot use it cleanly when the customer needs it. Arrived is not available. Received is not usable. In the building is not the same as in control. Fourth, outbound friction increases. Pick waves slow down. Travel paths become less efficient. Customer critical staging competes with inbound overflow. Outbound supervisors spend time working around congestion instead of moving freight through the planned sequence. The warehouse starts using effort to fight its own layout. Fifth, transportation cost appears. Trailers dwell longer. Carriers wait. Appointment reliability weakens. Recovery planning grows. Transportation starts defending, resequencing, and chasing problems that were created when the operation accepted more freight than the building could absorb. Finally, the customer feels the miss. Stores may still lose replenishment. Customer service may still have to explain. The business may ask how product arrived early and still fail to protect availability. That is the painful part. The organization pulled freight forward to reduce risk, but without route discipline, it created a different risk inside the warehouse. So that is why a full yard is not the first warning. It is a late warning. The first warning is the moment the receiving route stops, matching the building's ability to absorb, convert, and protect movement. This is where the better read becomes simple. The weak read says the dock still has appointments, so receiving can continue. The better read says the dock can still receive, but the warehouse may not be able to absorb the freight without damaging outbound flow. The weak read says early freight means the business is ahead. The better read says early freight only helps if the building can convert it into controlled inventory. The weak read says the team will deal with congestion if it happens. The better read says the capacity trap is visible now, and the cost of steering early is lower than the cost of fighting later. That is strategic evasion at the recognition level. The leader sees a trap forming before the operation collides with it. The leader protects the objective by changing the route. The leader avoids unnecessary exposure without abandoning responsibility. The tool is not about being clever. It is about route discipline under pressure. There is one more piece to respect. The forward read does not have to be perfect. It has to be strong enough to act responsibly. Leaders sometimes wait because they want certainty, but certainty often arrives in the form of a late truck, a blocked aisle, a missed replenishment load, or a customer escalation. By then, the read is easy because the damage is visible. Strategic evasion works earlier, when the warning is strong enough but the failure is not yet obvious. That takes judgment. It also takes the courage to explain a decision before the operation is forced to agree with it. That is not drama. That is leadership. The best time to protect a warehouse from a capacity trap is while the building still has room to choose a cleaner path. In a warehouse, late truth is expensive because the freight has already taken space, consumed labor, and narrowed the next move. This tool also fits inside the larger direct action system. CSA gives the first read. In this scenario, CSA keeps Janelle from seeing only inbound volume or only dock capacity. It widens the picture to yard pressure, put away capacity, storage availability, temporary location risk, inventory visibility, outbound staging, carrier appointments, team capacity, and customer promise. That cleaner CSA read gives Deepen better material to work with. Deepen is problem navigation. It helps the leader decide what kind of move the situation requires. If the trap has already become active, the move may need to be different. If the obstacle is already blocking the route, redirection may be required. If the operation needs immediate stabilization, a tactical response may be stronger. But when the trap is visible before it becomes active, strategic evasion is the right move inside Deepen. Pro adds value because every route change carries risk. If Janelle delays or resequences freight, that may create carrier cost, planning friction, or business frustration. If she keeps receiving without adjustment, that may damage inventory visibility, outbound movement, team capacity, customer trust, and leadership credibility. Pro helps the leader see what the decision could damage before damage spreads. Ace can sharpen the option set. The first answer might be to keep receiving or to stop receiving, but those are not the only options. Ace helps the leader compare better alternatives, resequence appointments, protect certain doors, hold low priority freight, move selected product to overflow, create put-away priority, or define a temporary limit on locations. Better options come from a cleaner read. TMC matters because the route change has to become clear direction. Transportation needs to know what changed. Dock leads need to know which doors are protected. Inventory control needs to know which temporary locations are allowed. Outbound needs to know which lanes stay clean. Replenishment planning needs to know which product is being protected. If communication is weak, the route change becomes another form of confusion. Pace and brain help when the alternate path needs a backup. What happens if overflow is not available? What happens if a priority trailer arrives earlier than expected? What information matters before the next route change? What benefits and risks come with each option? FLS turns the selected route into controlled action, and ALC later captures what changed so the next inbound surge starts from a better cycle. The system connection is not a catalog, it is an operating sequence. Read clearer, navigate smarter, protect the objective, communicate cleanly, execute with control, learn for the next cycle. Now bring this back to your own environment. Where does your operation mistake entry capacity for system capacity? Where does the schedule look workable while the floor is already absorbing too much friction? Where does an inbound appointment look harmless because the dock can take it, but the warehouse cannot put the freight away? Where are staging lanes becoming storage? Where are temporary locations multiplying without a control point? Where is put away falling behind the receiving rate? Where is outbound losing space to inbound overflow? Where is the yard becoming the hidden warehouse? Those questions matter because good teams can hide weak routes for a while. They work harder, they make space. They open temporary locations, they borrow labor, they squeeze another trailer in, they keep the operation moving. That effort deserves respect, but effort is not the same as control. A leader has to respect the team without letting the team's effort hide a route that is getting weaker every hour. Before you accept the next inbound surge is manageable, do not start with the dock schedule. Start with the absorption picture. Ask what freight is coming early, what it does after it crosses the dock, whether the building can locate it, whether put away can clear it, whether inventory visibility will survive it, whether outbound staging will stay protected, and whether customer critical movement can still happen without rework. Then write the read in plain language. The inbound surge is this. The dock can handle this. The warehouse may not absorb this. The trap forming is this. The objective we must protect is this. Those 5 lines do not replace the deeper tool, but they will tell you whether the current route deserves trust. If the route still protects the objective, move. If the route is carrying the operation toward avoidable exposure, steer. Do not wait for the dock to become the proof. By then, the trap may have already taken the cleanest options away. This is the final takeaway. The inbound surge does not have to own the dock. The leader has to read the capacity trap before the dock becomes the evidence. Early freight can protect one risk while creating another. A dock slot is useful, but it is not a storage plan. A receiving appointment is useful, but it is not a put-away plan. Product in the building is useful, but it is not controlled flow. The leader's job is not to defend the original route. The leader's job is to protect the objective. Strategic evasion gives leaders a way to do that before the operation loses options. It helps them see the trap, protect the movement, and adjust the path while the warehouse can still act with discipline. When you are ready to go deeper with this tool, go to www.direct-action-system.io/course-directory. Open the course directory, find the course tied to this tool, and start there. That is where the deeper application belongs. A trap avoided early is not a problem solved later. It is a decision that kept the operation from paying a cost it could already see coming. Steer around the capacity trap before it owns the dock. Thanks for listening to the briefing.